A brilliant tech CEO is betrayed by the woman he loved, only to be saved by a fearless 9-year-old girl who uncovers a web of espionage, deception, and digital warfare. As secrets unravel, trust is shattered, and justice is reclaimed from the shadows. What would you do if your future was stolen in silence? Let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories that challenge the heart and ignite the mind. It started with a whisper. Soft, almost too faint to catch. I was sitting at my desk, halfway through an encrypted message meant for Homeland Security, when Zuri's voice floated in from the doorway. "You have a camera in your office," she said, "but it's not yours." I froze. My fingers hovered over the keyboard mid-keystroke, the cursor blinking on the screen like it too had forgotten what to do. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind me, warming the edges of the walnut shelves and glinting off my polished awards. But the chill that rippled across my spine wasn't touched by any of it. I turned slowly. Not because I was afraid. No, fear is something I'd left behind in my 20s, but because something in her tone suggested this wasn't a child's imagination. Zuri stood just inside the door, her little fingers curled around the mahogany edge of my desk like she was holding on for balance. Or maybe for courage. She was only 9, just a kid. But she didn't look like one in that moment. Her dark eyes were wide but steady, her lips pressed into a straight line that held back something deeper than hesitation. She took a few steps into the room, silent on the thick Persian rug, and I could feel her watching me like I was the one in trouble. "Zuri," I said carefully, gently, "what do you mean there's a camera?" She leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped to a whisper again, like the walls themselves might be listening. "Behind the painting," she said, "the one Miss Celeste gave you." My mouth went dry. The painting. Of course, it was a muted, abstract skyline Celeste had gifted me 4 weeks ago. She'd smiled as she hung it herself above my bookshelf, laughing softly as she told me I needed a little warmth in my cold office. I hadn't thought twice. She was my fiancée, the woman I was going to marry in 3 months, the woman I trusted. But Zuri had seen something. "I saw it blink," she added, as if reading my thoughts. "At night, when I couldn't sleep." I stood up, slowly. "I've built my entire company on digital security, firewalls, encrypted nodes, defensive AI. No one outmaneuvers me in a system. But I hadn't thought to check my own damn office for physical surveillance. And here was a child, my niece, who'd barely spoken more than a few words since the accident that took her parents, now standing in front of me and telling me she had seen what my entire security team had missed." "How long have you known?" I asked. "A week," she replied, eyes downcast. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me." I took a breath, crossed the room, and pulled the painting off the wall. It came off easily, almost too easily, like it was made to be moved. Behind it, nestled near the top molding, was a tiny black circle, no bigger than an eraser, embedded right into the drywall. Sleek, hidden, professional. Not amateur work, a surveillance lens. My jaw clenched. "Go wait outside," I said quietly. But Zuri didn't move. "Number," she said, firm, resolute. I turned to her. She wasn't being disrespectful. She was being brave. There was more. I could see it in the way her shoulders didn't flinch. So I nodded and gestured for her to sit. She perched lightly on the edge of the leather chair across from me, folding her hands in her lap, like someone twice her age. "I traced the signal," she said. "It's not connected to any of your devices. I scanned it with my tablet and it doesn't match anything in the house." I stared at her. "You scanned it?" "I used my wireless trace app," she said. "It bounces pings off the router and flags anything suspicious. This one, it pings outside the house." I sat down heavily. This child, who still called me Uncle Graham in a voice as soft as her bedtime prayers, had just uncovered a high-level security breach. "And there are more," she added. "Living room, den, guest room, and your bedroom." I didn't say a word. I just stared at the blank wall where the painting had been. My mind reeled backward. The last month, Celeste bringing me coffee at just the right time, her sudden interest in redecorating, her suggestion to have a more open, collaborative space, her insistence on tidying my office herself just to surprise me. The kisses under that painting, the quiet dinners, her perfectly timed affection. None of it had been accidental. "You've been carrying this alone," I murmured. Zuri nodded. I let out a shaky breath. "I believe you." Her eyes widened slightly. You do? I should have believed you sooner. She didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. That was enough. I turned back to the wall and examined the camera again. The lens was embedded into a decorative molding. Subtle, refined, expensive. This wasn't something bought off Amazon. This was contractor grade. Embedded surveillance meant to record, not just spy, but to gather intel quietly, efficiently, with purpose. Betrayal wasn't a punch in the face. It was a smile under soft lighting and a lavender-scented kiss. I looked back at Zuri. From now on, we do this together. No more secrets. She nodded. Okay. For the first time since I'd brought her into my home, she smiled. A real one. I placed my hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. In that moment, something shifted. I wasn't the one protecting her anymore. She was the one who had protected me. And God help whoever had plant cameras in this house. Because I wasn't the man I used to be. And this time, I wasn't alone. We had just found the first wire, and we were going to pull till the whole damn web came down. I didn't sleep that night. After Zuri went to bed, after I made sure her door was locked, her nightlight on, her tablet powered down, I sat alone in the office, staring at the hollow place on the wall where the painting had hung. The lens, no bigger than my thumbprint, sat like an unblinking eye, quiet now but damning. It had seen too much, heard more. I poured myself a bourbon, didn't touch it. All I could think about was the implication. Someone had been listening, watching, planning. Not just once, not just in passing, but deliberately, intimately. This wasn't about me being important. This was about me being vulnerable. At 2:07 a.m., I heard light footsteps in the hallway. Then a soft knock. Uncle Graham? I opened the door to find Zuri in her oversized hoodie, tablet under one arm, and that serious expression again. The kind of look that doesn't belong on a child's face. She wasn't scared. She was focused. I think I found something else, she said. I didn't ask why she was awake. I just stepped aside. We sat on the floor of the office together, cross-legged, cables spread around us like a low-tech war room. I plugged her tablet into my secure server with a diagnostic port I rarely used. One I'd built myself years ago, a bypass to scan systems directly without network interference. I traced all the pings from the devices, she said, sliding open a map. They're not constant. They come online at night, mostly, between midnight and 4. Batch transmissions, I muttered, impressed. Trying to avoid detection software. She nodded. They're clever, but not clever enough. I looked at the map glowing between us, a soft, pulsing red dot in the center of a city grid. Austin, downtown, a generic-looking storage facility I didn't even recognize. No branding, no connection to our company or Celeste. They're routing everything there, Zuri whispered. Encrypted, but I cracked the signal structure. It's old, military style, not commercial. The chill that had been settling in the base of my spine all day finally took root. This wasn't just betrayal. This was espionage. I stood and crossed the room to my hidden server cabinet, a matte black monolith sealed with biometric locks. I placed my thumb against the scanner, then slid it open with a hiss. You're getting full access, I said, pulling out the auxiliary panel. Zuri looked up. You're giving me admin? I trust you, I said. Apparently more than I trust my own damn firewall. She blinked in surprise, then nodded and got to work. While she traced packets and decoded routing data, I pulled up our internal system logs. Every access point, every camera feed, every motion alert, it was all there. Living room activity at 3-4 a.m. when no one was scheduled to be up. Guest room entry. No signature logs, meaning someone had moved through untracked. Celeste. And Nolan, my CFO. My best friend since MIT. The man who stood beside me when I pitched our seed round. The man who toasted me the night I proposed. Suddenly I remembered something Josephine, our housekeeper, had said in passing, how Nolan had stopped by last week when I was out of town. Twice. Said he was reviewing paperwork. Celeste had acted surprised when I mentioned it. She wasn't surprised. She was rehearsed. Zuri looked up. There's more. I knelt beside her. She pulled up a series of data frames. The signals are hopping. They're not just sending footage, they're syncing. To what? To a shadow directory that matches your prototype logs. My stomach sank. They weren't just spying on me. They were stealing from me. My life's work, years of R&D, encryption algorithms, behavioral prediction layers, stuff not even on our main systems, stuff I kept offline for a reason. Can we stop it? I asked. She didn't look up. We can do more than that. What do you mean? Zuri slid a second tab forward. It was a shell interface, sleek, deceptive, designed to look like a high-priority system node. I can build a decoy, she said. One they'll find and think is real. I'll code it with a tracer. As soon as they interact with it, we'll have their exact extraction protocol. You want to bait them? She nodded. I looked at her for a long moment. You're 9. She shrugged. So? And damn if that didn't make me want to cry and laugh all at once. I sat back, rubbed my jaw. You know what this means, right? If we do this, if we lead them in, we'll be inviting the enemy right to the table. They're already at the table, she said. I just want to flip it. By dawn, the first draft of our trap was ready. A fake folder labeled NMAI NeuroSync Prototype Final. Zuri embedded a trace marker inside the metadata, a trigger that would silently log the identity of any device accessing it and ping a location back every 30 seconds. She called it Butterfly Sting. I stared at her. That's poetic. She smiled just a little, because butterflies look soft, but their wings are strong enough to carry thousands of miles, and they always remember where they came from. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. And for a long moment we sat there, side by side, both of us too tired to stand, too wired to sleep. Then the door creaked open. Josephine stood there, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. No words, just that piercing look of hers. I knew something was off, she said, handing one to Zuri. That woman was always too smooth, too perfect. She planted cameras, I said simply. Probably Nolan helped. She didn't flinch. She lingered too long near the den, always watching your face like she needed to know when you were lying. I looked at her. We're gonna set a trap. We'll need someone in the house who can keep things normal. Josephine snorted. Sweetheart, I've been pretending since before you were born. I can act like nothing's wrong until the ceiling falls. Zuri sipped her cocoa. It might. I glanced at them both. This quiet little army forming around me. My housekeeper, my niece, my 2 most unexpected defenders. And me? The brilliant so-called security genius who hadn't seen betrayal coming until a child pointed it out. But that ends now, because the cameras weren't just watching. They were warning, and we weren't running anymore. We were about to give them a show. The next morning I made 1 phone call, no texts, no emails, just a number I hadn't dialed in 7 years. He answered on the second ring. Ellis. Leon, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I need you. There was a pause, not hesitation, calculation. Then, give me time and a location, my place, today, quiet, copy. And just like that, the man who once ran Black Ops counterintelligence for Defense Intelligence Command was back on my radar. Leon Barksdale wasn't the kind of guy you called unless something was going very wrong, or very, very right. And I wasn't sure which this was yet. By 1 p.m., his truck rolled up the gravel path to my estate. Black, unmarked, and carrying more secrets in its trunk than most data centers. When I opened the door, Leon didn't shake my hand. He scanned the walls with his eyes, then looked down at Zuri, who peeked from behind me. She the kid who spotted it? He asked. She is. He gave her a slow nod. Smart eyes. Zuri didn't say a word. She just held up her tablet. That's my niece. In the office, I laid it all out for him. The hidden camera, the signal traces, the timestamps, the off-site storage address. Zuri chimed in here and there, navigating faster than either of us could talk. Leon listened, silent, stone-faced. When she showed him the live packet trail and its military-grade encryption layer, he finally spoke. This ain't consumer spy gear. This is Tier 2 ops-level stuff. Whoever placed this has been trained, not your average private investigator or jealous ex. She's not either of those, I said. She's Celeste. Leon's eyebrows raised. The fiancée? I nodded once. He exhaled sharply and looked at the wall where the painting had hung. Tell me you didn't put your core builds on the mainframe. I didn't, I said. But she's been syncing data through my interface logs, behavioral AI mapping, most of the predictive scaffold for the neurosync protocols. She's bleeding you slow, Leon muttered. Like a soft invasion. She wants the company, not just the secrets. She wants both. Leon looked back at me, jaw tightening. You need to flip this, right now. Otherwise, she walks away with everything you built while you sit around wondering what happened. That's the plan. Zuri tapped the screen. We're already baiting her. Leon looked at her, intrigued. We? She designed the honey trap, I said. Shadow protocol. She called it butterfly sting. Leon gave a rare smile. Kids got taste. Zuri looked proud but didn't say anything. Then Josephine came in with 3 mugs of black coffee like she had seen this coming days ago. She handed Leon his, then spoke with quiet certainty. I saw something. We turned. Last week, Nolan came by, said it was paperwork. You weren't home. Celeste didn't look surprised to see him. I straightened. You're sure? He brought a silver case, small, thin. They talked in the den. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. They were whispering. Leon didn't blink. Nolan's your CFO? My best friend, since MIT. Leon gave a sharp laugh without humor. And she's your fiancée. Congratulations, you've been infiltrated at 2 levels. Josephine folded her arms. I knew she was fake the second she said she liked jazz but couldn't name a Coltrane record. Zuri whispered, Who's Coltrane? Leon and I both turned to her like she'd just insulted our ancestors. We'll fix that later, I said. Right now, we've got a leak to close. Leon nodded. You've got the makings of a sting, but we need to catch them both in the act, real time, and we need to control what they think they're stealing. I'll build a clone of the system, I said, a sandbox version of the neurosync prototype, harmless but real enough to fool them. Zuri was already sketching on her tablet. We can embed tracer worms that trigger the moment she opens the file, Leon added, and a secondary log to catch Nolan if he moves it. You're saying, I said, we let them take it. Exactly, Leon replied. And while they're celebrating, we document every click, every transfer, every smile they fake while thinking they've won. Josephine sipped her coffee. You two talk like you've done this before. Leon didn't answer. By that evening, the trap was live. I uploaded the decoy folder to my personal terminal, then staged a fake work emergency, something that would draw Celeste into my office. Zuri and Leon set up a mirrored surveillance feed in the guest house, monitoring every movement, every microphone, every biometric ping. At exactly 6:12 p.m., Celeste came home. She walked in with takeout in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, smiling like she'd missed me, kissed me softly on the cheek, and glanced around like she always did, scanning the room in that subtle predatory way that now made my skin crawl. Smells like server heat in here, she said, slipping off her coat. You working hard or hardly working? Just running diagnostics, I said. Bit of a glitch. She walked over to my desk, setting the food down, her fingers trailing across the surface like she belonged there. You want help? No, I replied, glancing at the folder now conveniently open on the screen. You've helped enough. She laughed, light, charming, just a half note too sharp. She watched me leave for a call in the kitchen. I knew what she'd do next. And right on cue, 30 seconds after I stepped out, Leon's voice crackled in my earpiece from the guest house. She's scanning the file. I pictured her holding that sleek little device, the one I'd never seen before, syncing my bait prototype to the offshore server like she'd done it 100 times. She took the bait, Leon said. Transmitted. It's live. I turned back into the room like nothing had happened. She was already pulling the wine from the bag, playing domestic. I watched her. I watched her knowing that she had just stolen from me. Again. That she'd kissed me the same day she betrayed me. Again. And I smiled, because now I knew everything. And soon, she would know exactly what it felt like to lose. The next day started like any other. Celeste hummed while pouring almond milk into her coffee, wearing my old college hoodie like it was hers, like she belonged to a life she was quietly stealing. She didn't know the trap had already snapped shut. I played my part. Calm. Distracted. Left the fake prototype folder accidentally open on my desktop again, right next to an encrypted chat window, Zuri coded to look half-loaded. It was bait designed to look like a system glitch. Something that would seem just unsecured enough to tempt her. I left the room. I knew she'd bite. From the guest house, Leon whispered into my ear, She's scanning again. She's more confident this time. No hesitation. I pictured her behind me, kneeling beside my desk, that little flat device in her palm again, pulling every byte from my fake neurosync blueprint and routing it to her offshore handler. She was efficient. Too efficient. She's running a checksum to verify the package, Zuri added. She thinks it's the real deal. She's not wrong, I said. It's real enough to destroy my reputation, but fake enough to fry anyone who tries to weaponize it. Leon chuckled. You're getting good at dirty. I stared at the wall for a moment, remembering how I used to believe love was enough to keep someone honest. That time and trust could guard your back better than passwords and encryption. Then came the knock at the side entrance. Leon's voice went sharp. "We've got movement. Back hall. It's Nolan." I stiffened. My old friend stepped into the living room like he owned it, portfolio under one arm, phone in the other. He looked around too quickly, clearly not expecting me to be gone, clearly hoping for another quiet theft. Celeste froze. For just a second, but it was enough. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Leon turned up the audio. We heard everything. "We need to move the timeline," Nolan said. "He's slipping. I can feel it." "You said tomorrow." "I don't care. I want it now." From her tone, Celeste wasn't ready. She panicked, but Nolan didn't care. He was there to finish what they started. Meanwhile, Zuri had slipped quietly into the hallway, hiding behind the bookshelf nook, that little alcove near the air vent where she used to read spy novels and draw constellations on the wall with a flashlight. She didn't say a word. She just held up her tablet and hit record. Video. Audio. Time-stamped betrayal. 2 minutes later, I walked in. They both looked up, wide smiles painted on their faces like cheap lipstick. "Graham," Nolan said too quickly, "didn't expect you back so soon." "I thought you were flying to DC tomorrow," I replied. He blinked. "Who told you that?" I didn't answer. I just walked over to the bar, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and turned to them with the kind of stillness that makes men nervous. "To catching up," I said, raising my glass. Celeste's voice lifted too high. "Actually, Nolan was just leaving." "No," I said, sitting down. "He can stay. In fact, I want you both to sit." They hesitated. Something in my voice, maybe the calm, made them obey. They sat. Leon entered seconds later through the rear hallway, flanked by 2 men in plain clothes. Ex-intelligence. Subtle weapons. Quiet presence. Authority without volume. Celeste shot to her feet. "What is this?" I held up a hand. "Please, sit. It's just a conversation." I turned toward the wall-mounted monitor, tapped my phone. The screen came alive. First, footage of Celeste in my office syncing the file. Then Nolan receiving a drive 2 nights ago, her whispering into the hallway phone, his rushed arrival, their panicked exchange, every frame, every sound. Captured. Celeste went pale. "You bugged me," she whispered. "No," I said, "you bugged me. I just beat you to your own game." Nolan stood up. "Graham, listen, let's not make this into something it's not." "Oh, it is exactly what it is," I replied, my voice low. "It's treason. You didn't just betray me. You tried to dismantle the very thing I built with my fiancée." Celeste stepped forward. "You don't understand. I didn't mean to." "To fall in love?" I asked, sharp. She hesitated. "It was supposed to be a job, but I think, maybe, I did love you." I laughed, quiet but bitter. "Then you kissed me while you stole from me." Leon stepped forward, producing a folder from his coat. Printed documents, chain of custody records, IP logs, offshore transfers. "As of this moment," Leon said, "you're both under investigation for federal data theft, wire fraud, and corporate espionage. This is not a negotiation." 2 more agents entered from the back hallway. Celeste's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Nolan just stared at the floor. They didn't resist. As the cuffs clicked shut, Zuri stepped in from the side hallway. Her eyes didn't blink. She watched them with a kind of stillness that belonged to someone who had already accepted the truth before it was spoken out loud. Celeste's gaze met hers. A flicker of something passed between them. Guilt, maybe, or shame. But Zuri didn't flinch. She just stepped beside me and whispered, "You okay?" I crouched and pulled her close. "I am now." And as the front door shut behind them, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was honest. And it was ours. The morning after they were taken away, the house felt unnaturally still. Not peaceful, not yet, but stripped bare. The kind of silence that follows a storm, where everything has stopped moving but nothing feels steady. I sat at the edge of my bed, still in the same clothes from the night before. I hadn't opened my laptop. I hadn't touched my phone. Just sat there, staring at the faint imprint left on the carpet where Celeste's suitcase had once rested. The robe she used to wear still hung on the bathroom hook. A ghost of her lavender body oil lingered in the air. It should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the space I'd given her, the trust, the warmth, the illusions I let bloom while ignoring what was underneath. That, I realized, was the real betrayal. Not what she took, but what I let her see. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," I said quietly. Zuri stepped inside, wearing one of my oversized t-shirts that hung nearly to her knees. Her curls were a frizzy morning halo, and she held a mug with both hands like it was something sacred. "I brought you coffee," she said. "Didn't know how you like it, so I made it like the one you made for me last week." I reached for it, and our fingers touched for a brief second. The warmth of the mug was nothing compared to the warmth that pressed into my chest. "Thank you, sweetheart." She sat at the foot of the bed, swinging her legs slightly. "Is it over now?" I took a sip. Sweet, strong, just like her. "I wish I could say yes," I said. "But taking them down doesn't mean it's done. There's still damage to fix." Zuri didn't ask for details. She just nodded and looked at the floor. Then, after a moment, she asked the question I hadn't been able to ask myself. "Do you trust anyone now?" I stared at her. "I trust you." Her lips curled into a small, almost shy smile. Later that morning, Leon set up in the study again. The mobile unit had been replaced with a hardened portable server, air-gapped from every outside network. No more vulnerabilities, no more blind spots, just cold steel and code. "I've been up since 4, Leon said, handing me a file. "We found more. Miles wasn't the top of the chain. Vanessa wasn't either. She was mid-tier." I flipped through the report. Call logs, routing tables, traces of communications from fake corporate shells that didn't lead to the Caymans this time. They led to New York. "They weren't just stealing," Leon said. "They were duplicating your systems, creating ghost networks that mirrored your infrastructure. If we hadn't shut it down last night, they could have replaced you." I felt my jaw tighten. They wanted to erase me. "Not just you," he said. "Your legacy, your name." He paused, then added, "And there's more." I looked up. "One of your subsidiaries, Glass Tech Labs, was used as a funnel. Data was being rerouted through a shell company registered out of Brooklyn. Vanessa signed the merger documents 3 weeks before you proposed to her. Right before she started pushing me to expand East Coast integration," I muttered. Leon nodded. It was all part of the setup. My fists curled on the table. "So what do we do?" "We go to the source," he said. Quiet. No headlines, no leaks. Just a flight, a visit, and a knock on the door. I glanced toward the hallway. Zuri was laughing in the sunroom with Josephine, her legs tucked under her as she sketched something. Butterflies, probably. Or buildings. Or both. "She comes with us," I said. Leon raised a brow. "To New York?" "She's already been in the middle of it. And I trust her. I want her close." That night, we flew out on my private jet. Zuri sat beside me, headphones on, watching Hidden Figures on a small screen. Every now and then I glanced at her. The glow from her tablet lighting her face. She looked peaceful, strong. She had no idea how much she'd changed my life in just a week. We landed just after midnight and checked into a discreet boutique hotel in Soho. No names, no attention. The front desk clerk didn't even blink when I paid in cash. The next morning, Leon and I headed toward a warehouse district near the East River. On the outside, it looked like any other low-level tech satellite. Cheap signage, dusty windows, a few delivery trucks idling nearby. But inside? Inside was a replica of my entire architecture. Rows of black servers, blinking red and green, humming in rhythm. And right there in the center, a partitioned room marked private, stood a man in a crisp suit, clipboard in hand. He turned when he saw us. "Mr. Ellis," he said, "didn't expect you." "Who are you?" "Eric Vaughn," he replied smoothly. "Acting director of this site, or I was." Leon stepped forward, tossing a thick envelope onto the nearest desk. "Signed confession from Celeste. 2 terabytes of intercepted data. IP trails. Financial records. You've got maybe 10 minutes before this building is surrounded." Eric barely looked at the folder. "You're bluffing." I stepped in, voice low. "You're standing in a copy of my life's work. You think I wouldn't know how to burn it down?" He opened his mouth to reply, then saw Leon's badge and froze. He knew it was over. Federal agents moved in silently, no sirens, just quiet efficiency. By the time we stepped outside, Eric was being led out in cuffs. Across the street, Zuri stood by a pretzel cart, scarfing down a soft salted twist with both hands. "Was that one of the bad guys?" she asked when I joined her. "Yeah," I said. "One of the last." She wiped her hands. "Good. Can we go home now?" I paused. Home. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was her. And after everything, that was all that mattered. 2 days after Eric Vaughn was taken into federal custody, I received a package at the office. No postage, no courier slip, just a flat brown envelope sealed with wax. The symbol impressed into it was a monarch butterfly with its wings closed. I didn't open it immediately. It sat on my desk like a warning. Zuri was across the hall at her new desk, still far too large for her small frame, but she sat with the kind of posture that made people forget she was 9. She had her glasses on, hoodie pulled up, her stylus scribbling across a digital notepad as she built out predictive access matrices for our internal systems. She'd named her program ShadowNet. It listens for patterns, she'd explained the day before, not just the breach, but the behavior that leads to one. I'd nodded, proud and haunted all at once. This girl had seen more treachery in a week than most adults could stomach in a lifetime. And instead of retreating, she designed solutions. Solutions for people like me. When I finally broke the seal and pulled out the paper, the handwriting struck me first. Clean, elegant, deliberate. It wasn't a threat. Not directly, but it wasn't friendly either. Hello, Carter. You're a man of vision. But even visionaries can be blind. I never meant for Celeste to hurt you. She was only supposed to extract information. The pain, that was her flaw. Let's keep this professional. There's a deal to be made. Meet me alone, Battery Park. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., no one else. Not even the girl. There was no signature. Just the butterfly again, this time drawn in ink at the bottom corner. I didn't show the letter to Zuri. I didn't need to. She saw the tension in my jaw, the way I stared out the window a little too long. She didn't ask questions. But later that night, as we sat quietly in the living room with tea and toast, she looked up from her mug and said softly, "You're going to meet someone tomorrow, aren't you?" I blinked. "How do you know?" "I just do. You shouldn't have to carry this, Zuri." "I'm not," she said. "I'm helping you walk through it." I couldn't argue with that. At 10:58 the next morning, I was sitting on a weathered bench in Battery Park, watching the Hudson River shimmer beneath a pale sun. Joggers passed by, tourists snapped photos, no black cars, no obvious eyes. At 11:01 he arrived. Tall, gray-haired, the kind of man who could blend in at a boardroom, a courtroom, or a funeral and not raise suspicion in any of them. His suit was tailored but muted, his shoes polished but unremarkable. He carried no phone, no folder, just presence. He sat beside me without a word. For a full minute we said nothing. Then, in a voice like polished gravel, he spoke. "You were always too idealistic." I didn't turn. "You've got me at a disadvantage." "No," he said. "You gave that up the moment you fell for Celeste. That was your first mistake. The second was raising that girl to believe truth matters more than survival." Now I turned. "You know Zuri?" He smiled faintly. "I know everything. I built this industry before you could spell algorithm. I laid the foundations of every network you're trying so hard to protect. Then why try to destroy it?" "Because you made it inefficient," he said simply. "You built firewalls around ethics. You prioritize transparency. You think that's progress. But real power lives in shadow, not in open source code." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black flash drive, resting it lightly on the bench between us. "You walk away," he said. "You retire. Take the buyout I've arranged. Disappear. And the girl gets to grow up safe. Otherwise, the system you're trying to fix will turn on you. Fast. Violently. Irreversibly." I stared at the flash drive, then pushed it off the bench. "You touched the wrong family," I said, standing. He didn't follow, just smiled. "You've got courage," he said, "but you're outnumbered." I walked away without looking back. That night, I gathered my senior team at Hion, just 6 of us. No assistants, no PR, no lawyers, just the people I trusted most. Zuri sat quietly in the corner with her cocoa and her notepad, listening, watching. "We're gonna leak," I said. Gasps. Raised brows. "Not to the media," I clarified. "To them." I brought up a projection of a fake system design, a next-generation neural mesh prototype that didn't exist. Zuri had skinned it to look flawless, compelling, valuable. But it was a trap, a data sting embedded with trace code. The moment it was opened, we'd have their network, every IP, every alias, every ghost operation. "They'll think they're winning," I said, "but they'll be stepping into a firestorm." Leon nodded slowly. "You're lighting a fuse." "Exactly." Zuri piped up, and we named it Butterfly Sting 2.0. That made everyone smile. We ran the drop that night, quietly uploading the bait to a monitored network channel we knew was still under surveillance. Zuri stayed up beside me in the control room, legs tucked under her, eyes glowing in the dark as the trace code ran its silent web across the digital ether. They bit, Leon said, just before 3 a.m. Trace active. Within minutes, we had it. The signal, the routing node, the handoff server. And the name, Bixler Capital, a Manhattan-based investment firm that had no public link to technology, no reason to be intercepting advanced AI code. And yet, the trace led straight to a server buried inside their upper-floor data infrastructure. Leon leaned over the screen. You know what this means, right? They've been laundering stolen code through financial shells, I muttered, disguising theft as acquisitions, just like they tried to do with Glass Tech. Leon looked at me. You ready to finish this? I looked across the room at Zuri, now asleep, curled under a blanket Josephine had brought in hours ago. Yes, I said, but we don't just take down the system. Leon raised a brow. Then what? We burn it from the inside out, and we were just getting started. The next morning, the sky over Atlanta was gray, low-hanging clouds brushing the skyline like ash smudged across glass. I was already in the High-On War Room before the sun rose, dressed in a black long-sleeved shirt and worn jeans. No suit, no tie. This wasn't a day for ceremony. It was a day for reckoning. The room was silent except for the hum of the servers and the occasional quiet clatter of keys. One screen glowed against the darkness. Zuri's interface, ShadowNet, alive and weaving like a spider through our digital corridors. It pulsed with silver and blue lines, threads of movement and anomalies, each flicker a whisper of data trying to pretend it belonged. Zuri sat beside me at the corner of the long table, cocoa steaming next to her keyboard, her hoodie sleeves tugged over her hands. She looked too young to be sitting where she was, but no one in the room questioned her presence anymore. She'd earned her seat the hard way. You ready to run the trace when it hits? I asked. She didn't even look up. I already started it. A beat passed and then Leon's phone buzzed. They're coming, he said. Ping traces from Seoul, Frankfurt, and 2 masked U.S. locations. Heavy packet traffic hitting our core access logs. They're going after the intellectual property library, Ellen added from across the room. Trying to overwrite our internal ownership records. They want to erase us from our own servers, someone whispered. No, I said, they want to become us. The room tensed. The board had already tried to push me out last week, citing emotional compromise, as if trusting the wrong person invalidated the right work. But I'd survived that ambush. Now it was our system under attack, and this time the stakes weren't reputational. They were existential. Do it, I told Zuri. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Within seconds, the ShadowNet interface flared red, then collapsed into a pulsing node. There, she said, voice steady. They breached the decoy prototype, the file we seeded last night. Are they trying to deploy it? I asked. She shook her head. They're just copying and transferring, probably too afraid to launch until they verify. But every access point is tagged. We'll get them. Then, another signal flashed across the screen, this one different, familiar. Leon narrowed his eyes. Vanessa. My chest tightened. She's still connected? I asked. Not just connected, Zuri said quietly. She's actively logging in through a masked relay. Leon scowled. We should have shut down her path. No, I said. Let her watch. And watch she did. 15 minutes later, Bixler Capital's internal server began to stagger, overloaded not from the bait itself, but from the layered trace triggers Zuri had embedded. Each byte they touched pulled back metadata, user credentials, and most importantly, their central relay hub. We had it. Leon leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Confirmed. Bixler's relay is pushing through a third-party shell in Midtown. They're laundering access through a dummy software firm. Real employees. Fake product. Who's accessing it? Zuri tapped. Senior development lead, former cybersecurity consultant, worked on offshore anonymizers during the Equinox breach 2 years ago. Now he's here. And guess what else, she added, clicking to another screen. Vanessa didn't sever her link, she just cloaked it. She's still watching the entire exchange. Why? Ellen asked. Why would she stay connected? I stared at the display. Her digital signature hovered like a ghost over the logs. She wasn't just lingering, she was waiting. She wants to see it collapse, I said. Or maybe she wants to see us fail trying. Leon cracked his knuckles. Let's disappoint her. 10 minutes later, we activated the internal tripwire. Zuri's idea, of course. She called it The lantern. As soon as the attackers completed the data transfer, our server pushed a hidden payload into the packet stream, an executable burst that snapped the back door open from the inside. On the surface, it looked like a successful pull, but from our end, we saw every detail of their infrastructure. Got 'em, Zuri whispered. Leon's screen lit up with a full node chart. You want to make the call? I nodded. Let's do it. That afternoon, I walked into Beixler Capital's glass fortress on 57th like a man who belonged there. No appointment, no warning, just a small silver USB in my coat pocket and a folder under my arm. The receptionist blinked when she saw me, but the eyes said it all. She knew who I was. Everyone did now. Mr. Ellis, said the gray-haired man who met me near the elevator, the same one from Battery Park. He smiled like nothing had happened. You really don't understand subtlety, do you? He said. I handed the folder to his assistant. Inside, full trace logs, IP chains, breach signatures, metadata stamps, the confession from Vanessa, and a copy of our dummy file planted with tracker code. You've got until tonight, I said. Disband your network, or this goes to the SEC, the Department of Justice, and 3 media outlets who have standing interview requests with me. The man's face didn't flinch, but I saw it, in the flicker behind the eyes. He knew it was real. You have a child, he said, voice dipped in sugar. Be careful where you shine your light. I stepped closer. She's why I shine it. And then I left. No security stopped me, no cameras moved, just that still hush of a room where power had just shifted. Back at Hyon, Zuri was waiting in the hallway. She looked up from her sketchpad. You did it? She asked. We did it. She held up the pad. A new drawing, buildings cracked with roots growing through them, and a little girl holding a lantern in the middle of the rubble. You think it's over? She asked. I looked at the sketch, then out the window toward the horizon. It's not over, I said, but they blinked. And that's all we needed. Tomorrow, we'd finish the job. Tonight, we'd let the storm settle. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not because it was finished, but because we were winning on our terms, and because I wasn't fighting alone. It was just after sunrise when the knock came. I was in the kitchen making pancakes, something Zuri had asked for the night before with a sleepy yawn and a whisper. Make them the fluffy kind, please. She deserved that. After everything she'd endured, she deserved at least a soft morning with syrup and laughter. The knock wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. One of those knocks that carried intention. I wiped my hands and opened the door. Vanessa stood there. No makeup. No jewelry. Her once perfect hair was pulled back in a rough bun, and her coat looked like she'd worn it for too many days in a row. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They weren't defiant anymore, just hollow. She looked down at the floor. I shouldn't be here, she said quietly, but I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, I didn't speak. I should have slammed the door, or called Leon, or reminded her of every lie, every theft, every plan she made behind my back while she kissed me goodnight. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said, and only because Zuri isn't awake yet. She nodded once and stepped in. The silence between us wasn't sharp, just heavy, like dust floating in a room you hadn't opened in years. We sat in the den, the same room where Nolan once handed her that silver case. I remembered every detail. And now, here she was again, empty-handed, disarmed. I didn't know how far it would go, she said. When I started, I thought I was in control. Control, I repeated. You had my passwords, my trust. You had everything. I never had you, she whispered. Not really. And that's what changed everything. I studied her face, not as a woman I had once loved, but as a person. A complicated one. A broken one. Still responsible for her choices, but no longer pretending to be someone else. I came to confess, she said. Not to the government, to you, because I owe you that. Because I watched that little girl tear me apart on a screen without even knowing my name. She saved you. Not me. I leaned forward. Why now? Because the people above me, they're regrouping, she said. Beixler was a piece, not the board. You've wounded them, but they're still playing, and they won't stop just because you caught me. Names? I asked. She hesitated. I don't have them all, she said, but there's a firm, Crystal Holdings. They're not listed anywhere publicly, but they move funds through charities and research grants. They bank on people like you building things, and people like me breaking in. I let that sit for a long moment. Then, why warn me? Because I'm done, she said, and I need you to be ready when they come. She stood slowly. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I regret it. All of it. And then she was gone. By the time Zuri wandered into the kitchen, hair wild and eyes puffy, the pancakes were already stacked high on her plate, and the moment with Vanessa felt like a strange dream I hadn't quite shaken. I had a weird dream, Zuri said, yawning. Yeah? Someone came to say sorry. I smiled a little. Maybe it wasn't a dream. She blinked. Was it her? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured syrup over her pancakes and said, She's not important, you are. Later that day, I met with Leon on the rooftop of Hyun's downtown tower. The wind was sharp, tugging at our coats. Below us, the city pulsed. Cars, people, movement, life. She's right, I told him. It's not over. Leon didn't argue. He rarely did. Then we build something stronger, he said. Not just walls, I replied. A new framework. Transparent, resilient, open source to a point, but hardened where it matters. Leon raised a brow. A network no one can hijack, a network no one needs to. That afternoon, we drafted the first sketches of what would become Monarch. Zuri named it. A monarch butterfly, she said, is delicate, but it survives migration. It transforms, and it never forgets where it came from. That hit something deep. We launched quietly, folding it into Hyun's core infrastructure, but making it accessible to education institutions, nonprofit medical centers, and small research startups, the kinds of places that always got left behind when the giants stole the spotlight. Within 6 months, Monarch was being adopted across 3 continents. It didn't stop the darkness from circling, but it lit more corners than I ever expected. One night, almost a year later, I found Zuri standing in the backyard, staring up at the sky. It was the same spot we'd stood the night Vanessa was arrested. But this time her shoulders weren't tight, her hands weren't clenched, she was just breathing. What do you see? I asked. She pointed up. Orion's belt. I followed her finger. Did you know, she added, that in some cultures it's called the 3 Kings? I didn't, I said. She smiled. You always think you know everything, but I've got surprises too. I never doubted it. We stood there for a long time, in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like absence but presence. The kind that means you've been through fire and somehow you're still standing. I'm glad you're here, I said. She leaned into me. I know, she whispered. I am too. And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed that the world, though bruised and imperfect, still had space for light. Especially the kind that came from the smallest hands, holding the brightest lantern. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. It means more than you know. What we've just witnessed isn't just a tale about betrayal or corporate espionage. It's a story about resilience, redemption, and the power of unexpected allies. It's about how, even in a world full of manipulation and hidden agendas, truth still matters. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room, like Zuri's, can become the loudest beacon of change. Life often throws us into battles we never asked for, but how we respond, with courage, clarity, and compassion, defines who we are. Trust is fragile, but when it's rebuilt with honesty and earned loyalty, it becomes unbreakable. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What part of the world do you call home? If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing to our channel. We have more powerful stories coming your way. Stories that remind us of our shared strength, our silent victories, and our capacity to rise. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and stay curious.